Jinwoo stuck in a time-warping dungeon. Solo leveling, Part 1. The world had changed. Gates, mysterious portals connecting the human realm to dungeons filled with monsters, had appeared without warning, reshaping society. Hunters, individuals blessed with supernatural abilities, emerged as humanity's last line of defense against the horrors lurking within these dungeons. Among them was Sung Jinwoo, a young man who had been labeled the weakest E-rank hunter. His strength was barely above that of an average human, and his skills were laughable compared to the elite hunters who could cleave through monsters with ease. Yet, Jinwoo had one thing others lacked: an unyielding determination to survive and protect his family. His mother lay in a hospital bed, her condition worsening by the day, and his younger sister, Jinna, depended on him. For them, he endured the ridicule and danger of being a hunter. One fateful day, Jinwoo found himself assigned to a low-rank dungeon raid. The party consisted of a handful of E-rank hunters like himself, led by a D-rank tank named Kang Taishik. The dungeon was supposed to be a routine clearance, a simple job to earn some much-needed cash. But as they ventured deeper, something felt off. The air grew heavy, the walls pulsed with an eerie glow, and the usual low-level monsters were nowhere to be seen. Jinwoo's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but Taishik dismissed his concerns, eager to claim the dungeon's rewards. They pressed on, only to find themselves trapped in a massive chamber with no exit. The ground beneath them shifted, and the walls began to warp and twist, as if the dungeon itself was alive. A voice echoed through the chamber, cold and mechanical: "Welcome to the trial of time. Survive, and you may leave. Fail, and time will consume you." Before anyone could react, the chamber erupted in chaos. Monsters unlike anything they had ever seen emerged from the walls, ghostly figures wreathed in shadows, their eyes glowing with malevolence. Taishik barked orders, but his voice was drowned out by the cacophony of battle. Jinwoo gripped his dagger tightly, his heart pounding as a shadowy creature lunged at him. He sidestepped, narrowly avoiding its razor-sharp claws, and countered with a slash to its side. The blade barely scratched the monster, but it was enough to draw its attention. The creature roared, its form shifting and solidifying into a more humanoid shape. Jinwoo's mind raced as he analyzed its movements. It was fast, but predictable. He ducked under a sweeping claw strike and drove his dagger into its chest. The monster let out a guttural scream before dissolving into black mist. But there was no time to celebrate. Another monster was already upon him, this one larger and more menacing. Jinwoo's body moved on instinct, years of training and survival instincts kicking in. He rolled to the side, avoiding a crushing blow, and slashed at the monster's leg. The blade bit deep, causing the creature to stagger. Jinwoo seized the opportunity, leaping onto its back and plunging his dagger into its neck. The monster thrashed wildly, but Jinwoo held on, his grip tightening as he twisted the blade. With a final, ear-piercing shriek, the monster collapsed, its body disintegrating into shadow. Around him, the other hunters were not faring as well. Taishik was locked in a desperate struggle with a massive, serpentine monster, its scales glinting like polished obsidian. The tank's shield was cracked, and his movements were slowing. Jinwoo wanted to help, but another wave of monsters was closing in. He gritted his teeth and prepared for the next fight. His body was already aching, his stamina dwindling, but he couldn't afford to stop. He had to survive. For his family. As the battle raged on, Jinwoo noticed something strange. The monsters he defeated left behind faint wisps of energy that seemed to seep into his body. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then he felt it, a surge of strength, a flicker of power that hadn't been there before. His movements became faster, his strikes more precise. He didn't understand what was happening, but he didn't question it. He used this newfound strength to cut through the next wave of monsters, his dagger flashing like a silver streak in the dim light. But the dungeon wasn't done with them. The chamber began to shift again, the walls closing in as time itself seemed to warp and distort. The voice returned, colder and more menacing than before: "The trial of time has begun. Prove your worth, or be erased." Jinwoo's vision blurred as the world around him twisted and folded in on itself. When his sight cleared, he was alone. The other hunters were gone, and the chamber had transformed into a labyrinth of shifting corridors and impossible geometry. He was trapped in a time-warping dungeon, with no way out and no allies to rely on. Jinwoo took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. He had no choice but to press forward. The energy from the defeated monsters still coursed through him, and he could feel it growing stronger with each step. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was determined to survive. For his mother. For Jinna. For himself. The trial of time had begun, and Jinwoo would either conquer it or die trying. As he ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the shadows seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing around him. He could feel the dungeon's gaze upon him, watching, waiting. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic beat. Jinwoo's grip tightened on his dagger as he rounded a corner and came face to face with his next challenge, a towering figure clad in black armor, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The figure raised a massive sword, its blade crackling with dark energy. Jinwoo's heart raced, but he stood his ground. This was no ordinary monster. This was a boss-level enemy, and it was blocking his path. The armored figure charged, its movements impossibly fast. Jinwoo barely had time to react, diving to the side as the sword came crashing down, shattering the ground where he had stood. He rolled to his feet and countered with a slash to the figure's side, but the blade glanced off its armor as if it were made of steel. The figure backhanded him, sending him sprawling. Pain shot through his body, but Jinwoo forced himself to stand. He couldn't afford to lose. Not here. Not now. The figure advanced, its sword raised for another strike. Jinwoo's mind raced as he searched for a weakness. The armor was impenetrable, but perhaps there was another way. He focused on the energy within him, willing it to grow stronger. As the figure swung its sword, Jinwoo leapt into the air, his body moving with a speed and agility he hadn't known he possessed. He landed on the figure's shoulder and drove his dagger into the gap between its helmet and chest plate. The figure roared in pain, its movements faltering. Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He twisted the blade and pulled it free, then plunged it in again. The figure staggered, its sword falling from its grasp. With a final, desperate cry, it collapsed, its body dissolving into shadow. Jinwoo stood over the fallen figure, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. The energy from the defeated boss surged through him, stronger than ever before. He could feel his body changing, his strength increasing. But he knew this was only the beginning. The trial of time was far from over, and the dungeon had many more horrors in store for him. Jinwoo tightened his grip on his dagger and pressed on, his resolve unshaken. He would survive. He would conquer this dungeon. And he would emerge stronger than ever. Jinwoo's breath came in ragged gasps as he stood at the center of the time-warping dungeon, the air thick with the acrid scent of mana and the faint metallic tang of blood. The walls around him pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly glow, shifting and distorting as if the very fabric of time was unraveling. He had already faced countless waves of monsters, each more vicious and cunning than the last, but now the dungeon had thrown its greatest challenge at him, a sentient, time-manipulating entity known as the Chrono-Lost. The creature loomed before him, its form flickering in and out of existence, its eyes glowing with a cold, calculating intelligence. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his muscles screaming in protest, but he knew he couldn't afford to falter. Not now. Not when the stakes were this high. The Chrono-Lost lunged, its movements a blur as it manipulated time itself to close the distance between them in an instant. Jinwoo barely had time to react, his instincts kicking in as he sidestepped the attack, the air whistling past his ear as the creature's clawed hand narrowly missed him. He countered with a swift strike of his dagger, but the warden phased out of existence, reappearing behind him in a heartbeat. Jinwoo spun around, his dagger clashing against the warden's blade with a shower of sparks. The impact sent a jolt through his arms, but he gritted his teeth and pushed back, his muscles straining against the overwhelming force. The warden's eyes glinted with amusement, as if it were toying with him, and Jinwoo knew he had to change tactics. He activated his shadow extraction skill, summoning a swarm of shadow soldiers to his side. The shadows materialized in an instant, their forms dark and menacing, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. Jinwoo barked out orders, his voice sharp and commanding, and the shadows surged forward, engaging the warden in a flurry of attacks. The creature snarled, its movements becoming more erratic as it struggled to fend off the relentless assault. Jinwoo used the distraction to his advantage, darting around the battlefield, his dagger flashing as he struck at the warden's weak points. But the creature was far from defenseless. With a wave of its hand, it slowed time around Jinwoo, his movements becoming sluggish as if he were wading through molasses. The warden's blade arced toward him, and Jinwoo's heart raced as he realized he wouldn't be able to dodge in time. In a desperate move, he activated his ruler's authority, the skill allowing him to momentarily override the warden's time manipulation. The world snapped back into focus, and Jinwoo twisted his body, narrowly avoiding the blade as it sliced through the air where his head had been moments before. He retaliated with a powerful kick, his foot connecting with the warden's chest and sending it stumbling backward. The shadows pressed their advantage, their attacks growing more ferocious, but the warden wasn't done yet. With a roar, it unleashed a shockwave of temporal energy, the force of it sending Jinwoo and his shadows flying across the room. Jinwoo hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him, but he forced himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He knew he was reaching his limit, but he couldn't afford to give up. Not when the fate of the dungeon, and possibly the world, hung in the balance. He reached deep within himself, tapping into the reserves of mana he had been saving for this very moment. His body began to glow with a faint, golden light as he activated his awakening skill, the power surging through him like a tidal wave. His muscles bulged with newfound strength, his senses sharpened to an almost supernatural degree, and his movements became faster and more precise. The warden seemed to sense the change, its eyes narrowing as it prepared for the next round of combat. Jinwoo didn't give it the chance to strike first. He charged forward, his movements a blur as he closed the distance between them in an instant. His dagger flashed in a series of rapid strikes, each one aimed at a vital point on the warden's body. The creature countered with its own attacks, its blade clashing against Jinwoo's with a deafening clang, but Jinwoo was relentless. He pushed past the pain, past the exhaustion, his focus narrowing to a single point, the warden's core, the source of its power. He could see it now, a faint, pulsating glow deep within the creature's chest, and he knew that was his target. The warden, sensing his intent, unleashed a devastating temporal blast, the force of it ripping through the air and threatening to tear Jinwoo apart. But Jinwoo was ready. He activated his shadow exchange skill, swapping places with one of his shadow soldiers just as the blast hit. The shadow was obliterated in an instant, but Jinwoo was already moving, his dagger aimed straight for the warden's core. The creature roared in defiance, its blade swinging toward him in a desperate attempt to stop him, but Jinwoo was faster. With a final, explosive burst of speed, he plunged his dagger into the warden's chest, the blade piercing the core and shattering it in a blinding flash of light. The warden let out a final, ear-splitting scream before its body disintegrated into a cloud of shimmering particles, the time-warping effects of the dungeon fading with it. Jinwoo collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion, but a sense of triumph surged through him. He had done it. He had pushed past his limits, adapted to the fight, and emerged victorious. But as the dungeon began to crumble around him, he knew this was only the beginning. The challenges ahead would be even greater, and he would need to grow stronger if he hoped to survive. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of rest, his mind already racing with plans for the battles to come. The air inside the dungeon crackled with tension, the walls pulsating with an eerie, otherworldly glow. Jinwoo stood at the center of the chamber, his shadow soldiers arrayed behind him like a spectral army, their forms flickering in the dim light. Before him loomed the final boss of the time-warping dungeon, a colossal entity known as the Chronos Tyrant, its body a swirling mass of temporal energy and jagged, obsidian-like armor. Its eyes burned with the fury of 1,000 timelines, and its voice echoed like the tolling of a death knell. "You dare challenge the master of time itself?" It roared, its words reverberating through the chamber, shaking the very fabric of reality. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his muscles taut with anticipation. He had come too far to falter now. "I don't just dare," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within him. "I'm here to end this." The battle erupted in an instant, the Chronos Tyrant lashing out with a whip of temporal energy that sliced through the air with a deafening crack. Jinwoo dodged with inhuman speed, his reflexes honed to perfection through countless battles. He countered with a flurry of shadow-infused strikes, each blow landing with precision, but the tyrant's armor absorbed the damage, its form shifting and reforming as if time itself were bending to its will. The shadow soldiers surged forward, their weapons flashing as they attacked from all angles, but the tyrant's temporal aura slowed their movements, rendering them almost useless. Jinwoo gritted his teeth, sweat dripping down his face as he realized the true extent of the enemy's power. "Is this all you've got?" The tyrant taunted, its voice dripping with malice. "Time is my domain, and within it, you are nothing but a fleeting moment." Jinwoo's mind raced as he struggled to find a weakness. The tyrant's control over time was absolute, its attacks unpredictable and devastating. One moment, it would accelerate time, forcing Jinwoo to move at blinding speeds just to keep up, and the next, it would slow time to a crawl, leaving him vulnerable to its strikes. His body ached from the strain, his stamina pushed to its limits. But deep within him, a spark of determination ignited. He had faced impossible odds before, and he had always emerged victorious. This time would be no different. "You're wrong," Jinwoo growled, his voice low but filled with resolve. "Time may be your domain, but I'm the one who decides how my story ends." With a roar, Jinwoo unleashed the full power of his shadow army, commanding them to merge into a single, towering entity. The colossal shadow soldier, a manifestation of Jinwoo's will, charged at the tyrant, its massive fists crashing down with earth-shattering force. The tyrant staggered, its temporal aura flickering as it struggled to maintain control. Jinwoo seized the opportunity, darting forward with blinding speed, his dagger glowing with dark energy. He plunged the blade into the tyrant's chest, aiming for its core, but the creature retaliated with a burst of temporal energy that sent him flying across the chamber. He crashed into the wall, pain shooting through his body, but he forced himself to his feet, his eyes blazing with determination. The tyrant laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the chamber. "You cannot defeat me," it sneered. "I am eternal, and you are but a fleeting shadow." Jinwoo wiped the blood from his lips, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't win through brute force alone. The key to victory lay in understanding the nature of the tyrant's power. As the creature prepared its next attack, Jinwoo closed his eyes, focusing on the flow of time around him. He could feel it, the subtle shifts and distortions, the way the tyrant manipulated it to its advantage. And then, in a flash of insight, he realized the truth. The tyrant's power wasn't infinite. It was drawing energy from the dungeon itself, from the countless timelines it had consumed. If he could disrupt that connection, he could weaken it. Summoning every ounce of his strength, Jinwoo unleashed a devastating wave of shadow energy, targeting the dungeon's core. The chamber trembled as the energy surged through the walls, disrupting the flow of time. The tyrant roared in fury, its form flickering as its power waned. Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He charged forward, his dagger glowing with dark energy, and plunged it into the tyrant's core. The creature let out a final, agonized scream as its body began to disintegrate, its temporal energy dissipating into the air. The dungeon itself began to collapse, the walls crumbling as the flow of time returned to normal. Jinwoo stood amidst the chaos, his body battered and bruised, but his spirit unbroken. He had done it. He had defeated the Chronos tyrant and broken the dungeon's hold over time. As the dust settled, he felt a profound sense of relief, but also a deep sadness. The battle had taken its toll, not just on him, but on his shadow soldiers as well. Many of them had been destroyed in the fight, their forms fading into nothingness. Jinwoo clenched his fists, vowing to honor their sacrifice. They had fought alongside him until the very end, and he would never forget their loyalty. The aftermath of the battle was both triumphant and bittersweet. The time-warping dungeon, once a place of terror and despair, was now nothing more than a crumbling ruin. Jinwoo emerged from its depths, his body weary but his spirit stronger than ever. The world outside had changed in ways he could scarcely comprehend. The defeat of the Chronos tyrant had disrupted the flow of time, creating ripples that would reshape the future. Hunters across the globe felt a shift in the balance of power, as if a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Jinwoo knew that his actions had altered the course of history, but he also knew that the fight was far from over. There would always be new threats, new challenges to face. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, a chance to reflect on all that he had accomplished. As he walked away from the ruins of the dungeon, Jinwoo felt a sense of purpose burning within him. He had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. He had pushed himself to his limits and beyond, and in doing so, he had become something more than just a hunter. He was a force of nature, a shadow that would forever haunt the nightmares of his enemies. And as he looked to the horizon, he knew that his journey was far from over. The universe had been changed by his actions, and the future was his to shape. With a determined smile, Jinwoo took his first step into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.